Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
That news out of Brisbane, it's really hit hard, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really has.
It's just one of those stories that, well, it immediately makes you stop and think, you know, about trust and technology and what happens when things go wrong.
Definitely.
We're talking, of course, about that incredibly upsetting incident, a woman giving birth to another patient's baby unknowingly because of an embryo mix-up at an IVF lab.
The level of distress is just unimaginable. And it's made news absolutely everywhere.
It has, and it puts this huge spotlight, doesn't it, on the trust people place in these clinics, these incredibly specialized places.
Absolutely. And what's maybe even more significant is how this one awful case has opened up a much bigger conversation, about how often errors might actually happen in IVF labs generally.
Right. And can they be prevented? Especially when you look at how huge the whole assisted reproductive technology industry has become. It's just booming.
It really is.
So that's exactly what we want to do in this deep dive. We want to try and, pull back the curtain on this whole complex issue for you.
Yeah, unpack it a bit.
We'll look at why the industry is growing so fast, how it's regulated or not around the world, what we actually know about how often errors occur.
Based on the data we have.
Exactly. And crucially, what can realistically be done to stop these kinds of, life-altering mistakes from happening.
Okay, so starting with that growth, it's genuinely exponential.
Why is that? What's driving it?
Well, a lot of it comes down to big societal shifts, really. Probably the biggest factor is people deciding to have children later in life.
Which often means facing more challenges with natural conception.
Precisely. So that demographic trend alone means way more people are turning to technologies like IVF.
But it's more than just age now, isn't it? I mean, we're seeing lots of single women, same-sex couples.
That's right. And also people choosing fertility preservation. Egg freezing, for example. So the demand is coming from lots of different places now. It's diversifying.
And it's worth reminding ourselves maybe what these processes actually involve. IVF, ICSI, we're talking about handling sperm and eggs, the gametes in a lab, right? Creating embryos.
Exactly. Super precise work. And then often freezing embryos for later use, which has another whole layers, isn't it? Storage, tracking, identification. It gets very complex.
And the numbers involved are just, they're kind of staggering.
They really are.
If you look at Australia, just as one example, back in 2022, they performed over 100,000 assisted reproductive treatment cycles.
100,000, wow.
Yeah, and that was up more than 25% from just 5 years earlier, in 2017.
So that's massive growth.
It is, and it's not just numbers, is it? It represents this huge shift in how families are built. There's so much emotion, so much money tied up in this globally, and that scale, it just makes every single step even more critical.
Which, naturally, leads you to ask, okay, with this rapid growth and such delicate work, how is it all overseen? How's it regulated across the globe?
And the answer seems to be, it varies a lot.
Yeah, there's no single global standard. It's really quite a patchwork.
So let's start where this recent story happened. Australia. Now, my understanding is their IVF industry is actually seen as being pretty tightly regulated, more so than many other places.
That's generally true, yes. They have a specific body, the Reproductive Technology Accreditation Committee, RDT.
RDT, right. And clinics need to be licensed by them and follow their rules, their code of practice. What does that actually involve?
Well, the RT code is quite detailed, especially around storing and identifying embryos and gametes. It actually says clinics have to show proof of their policies, like when, how, and by whom the identification, matching, and verification are recorded at all stages, including digital and manual record keeping.
Okay, so that sounds very specific, very procedural, trying to nail down every step.
It suggests a really conscious effort to prevent mix-ups, absolutely.
And doesn't it go further? They also have to report serious problems to RTAC.
Yes, they do. Serious adverse events. And that list specifically includes gamete or embryo identification mix-up.
Okay. Plus, they have national ethical guidelines and state laws for reporting data, too. So on paper, it looks like a lot of oversight.
It does seem quite robust, yeah. Which makes you wonder how other countries compare. Like the UK. They have an interesting approach.
Right. The Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority, the HFEA.
Exactly. And the HFEA doesn't just regulate. They require clinics to report incidents. And they categorize them, too. Grade A, B, C. Grade A is the really serious stuff, severe harm to one person or major harm to many.
And the key difference there, which I think is fascinating, is that the UK publishes this data. It's in a publicly available annual report.
That's the crucial bit. Transparency.
Which you really don't see everywhere in medicine, especially sensitive areas like this.
No, you don't. And that transparency looks even starker when you contrast it with, say, the United States.
Ah, the US, where the situation is different.
Very different. The IVF industry there is, well, it's often described as largely unregulated at the federal level.
Meaning clinics don't have to report errors to anyone central.
Broadly speaking, no. There's no federal mandate for reporting adverse incidents like mix-ups or losses. No central database collecting that kind of information systematically.
Wow. That's a huge gap compared to Australia or the UK. Makes you wonder what might be missed.
It certainly does. Now, there are professional guidelines. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine, ASRM, they say clinics should have strong procedures. They talk about an ethical duty to tell patients if an error happens.
But these are guidelines, not laws. No real teeth behind them in terms of mandatory reporting.
Essentially, yes. They're professional standards, ethical obligations, but not legally mandated requirements with a national enforcement or data collection body like the HFEA or, to some extent, RTAG-NC. It reflects a different philosophy, perhaps more focused on innovation speed or maybe industry influence, rather than centralized safety data collection.
Okay, so we've got this picture now. Australia, quite regulated. UK, regulated and transparent reporting. US, much less regulated, no mandated reporting. A real patchwork. But what does this all actually mean for knowing how common IVF errors really are? Because the sources are pretty clear. There's no global data on IVF errors.
That's the fundamental challenge.
It seems impossible to know the true frequency. We mostly just hear about the really bad ones that make the news, right?
That's spot on. Without consistent mandated reporting across the board, our picture is just inherently incomplete. We're missing data.
Take Australia again. That Brisbane mix-up, incredibly, seems to be the first known incident of this nature, an embryo mix-up resulting in a live birth in their entire 40-year IVF history.
Which suggests that specific type of catastrophic error is, thankfully, very rare there.
But other things have gone wrong, haven't they? There have been reports over the years, alleged use of the wrong donor sperm, embryos destroyed by contamination.
Yes, or inaccurate genetic testing leading to potentially good embryos being discarded. So errors do happen, even within that regulated system, just maybe not that exact kind of mix-up until now.
So even with the rules, things can slip through. What about the UK then? With their public reports, do we get a better sense of error rates there?
We definitely get more clarity. That's the whole point of the transparency, right? Their latest HFEA report for 2023-24 showed one grade A incident, one severe event.
Just one.
In that year, yes. And notably, it was the first grade A incident since 2019-20 when they reported two.
Okay. So the public data suggests these most severe errors are indeed quite rare, which must help with public confidence and lets them focus on prevention.
Exactly. It allows for monitoring trends and targeting improvements.
Now let's swing back to the US. Less regulation, no public reporting. What kinds of things have surfaced there, given we don't have official stats?
Well, the incidents that do come out in the U.S. are often quite alarming, and they tend to emerge through lawsuits or patient complaints, not official channels.
Like what?
There have been some really distressing cases involving storage tank failures, malfunctions at two different clinics, actually, that destroyed thousands of frozen eggs and embryos.
Thousands? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, huge numbers. Which highlights a different kind of vulnerability. Maybe not just human error in handling one embryo, but catastrophic equipment failure affecting many patients at once, and no central reporting system to track it.
And then you have those heartbreaking embryo mix-up cases that end up in court, like that case in Georgia in 2023.
That was a terrible situation. A woman delivering a black baby when both she and her sperm donor were white.
Leading to this awful legal fight with the biological parents.
Right. And she ended up having to give the baby up, essentially, to avoid a protracted legal battle. Just a profound tragedy, showing the absolute highest stakes involved here.
It really does.
And it brings up this crucial point about the lack of data in the U.S.
Yeah.
Many experts argue that most errors probably just go unreported because reporting isn't required and there isn't really meaningful regulation enforcing it.
So the cases we hear about, however awful, might just be the visible part, the tip of the iceberg.
That's the concern, yes. It's incredibly hard to gauge the true frequency or the types of errors that might be happening more quietly.
Which brings us squarely to the really big question hanging over all this. Are these IVF errors preventable?
That is the question.
Because the Brisbane incident feels like such a paradox. It happened even with Australia's stringent regulation and oversight that we just talked about.
Exactly.
If they have all these checks, these multi-step ID processes designed to stop this exact thing, how could human error still lead to this outcome?
It's baffling. And that's what the independent investigation there really needs to get to the bottom of. Not just assigning blame, but understanding how the system failed. How did those processes, those safeguards, break down?
It suggests maybe regulation alone isn't enough, that there are other factors.
That's what it seems to imply, doesn't it? Regulation provides the framework, the rules, but it might not be a perfect shield. You've got the human element, the pressures of work, the lab environment, maybe the culture. These things can potentially undermine even the best rules on paper. So where did the system actually fail, despite the regulations? That's the deep dive insight needed.
And our sources point to a couple of areas that might need looking at, beyond just the written protocols, like staffing levels.
Absolutely.
You have to wonder, in such a high-pressure lab environment, are clinics properly staffed? Can people handle the volume and the delicate nature of the work without being rushed or stressed, which could lead to mistakes?
It's a critical factor. And tied right into that is staff training and supervision, especially for more junior staff. Are they getting enough support, enough oversight? Errors are just more likely when people are overworked, undertrained, or not properly supervised in these critical, high-stakes tasks.
And maybe the culture in the lab matters too. Like, is it okay to report a near miss?
Yeah.
Or is there a fear of blame?
That's huge. A culture that encourages learning from mistakes and near misses, not just ticking compliance boxes, is vital, but often harder to measure or regulate.
So putting this all together, what does effective prevention look like going forward, especially for places like Australia that already have strong systems? One idea mentioned is adopting the UK model more fully.
Specifically the transparency aspect.
Making the data about adverse events, the ones currently reported to RTAC, privately making that public, in an annual report, like the HFEA does.
That's the suggestion. And it seems crucial for building and maintaining public trust. Imagine a report that doesn't just list errors, but also details what clinics are doing to prevent them happening again.
Right, that proactive communication.
It could go a long way to reassure the public, as the source material puts it, because this industry runs on hope and trust, and transparency about problems and solutions is just invaluable when the stakes are so personal and high.
So wrapping this up, where does this deep dive leave us and leave you, our listeners?
Well, I think it underscores just how complex IVF is. It's this incredible, booming field, vital for so many people trying to build families. Amazing science.
But also one where the tiniest mistake, the slightest error, can have these enormous life-changing consequences.
Absolutely. And we've seen this global picture emerge, haven't we? Regulation varies so much. Stringent in Australia, transparent reporting in the UK, much less regulated in the US.
Making it really hard to know the true global frequency of errors because the data just isn't collected consistently.
It's a field built on precision science and profound hope. But human systems, human pressures, human fallibility, they're always part of the equation.
They are, which leaves us with something to think about. Here's a final thought for you to consider. Think about that immense trust patients place in IVF clinics. Just the sheer weight of it.
Yeah.
In a world that increasingly demands transparency and accountability everywhere, how does this global IVF industry keep evolving? Not just technologically, but in its practices, its data sharing. How does it build even greater public confidence and ensure the safety of every single egg, every sperm, every embryo?
What does real global teamwork on preventing errors look like in such a uniquely sensitive area?
Yeah.
Especially as it keeps growing so fast.
It's a huge question, and one that needs constant attention and thoughtful answers as this technology continues to profoundly shape so many lives around the world.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.